and welcome to our FAS Farm Advisory Service webinar on the topic Protecting Urea, Your Pocket and the Planet. My name is Seamus Donnelly. I'm the Senior Consultant with SAC working out of the Stranraer office, and it's my privilege tonight to chair this very topical meeting with Dr. David Wall from Teagasc as our speaker. With Scotland looking to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2030, and that's only 10 years away. Obviously, agriculture is going to be encouraged to play a central role. Now, whether that is by simply improving the overall efficiency, growing better quality silage to improve the physical performance, or whether it's using techniques such as low emission spreading systems, be that the dribble bar or the trailing shoe, to cut down ammonia losses, and also at the same time gain a bit in the nitrogen that's available to the grass. Or it could be something as simple as looking to spread a bit more of your slurry in the spring, obviously at the correct rate. Now that in itself, just to take that as an example, could have the impact if you shift it and spread 20% more slurry in the springtime. You could reduce the overall carbon footprint by 1.5%. So it's really these small steps we're looking to try to take over the next 10 years. And if everybody takes those small steps, it should result in us, farmers, etc., meeting their targets. I first heard Dr. David Wall, our speaker tonight, a few months ago on a webinar talking about protected urea. And he went on to explain how Ireland saw it as the best fit option for making inroads into their EU environmental targets, and at the same time would have minimal cost implications. I felt he was the right man, and this is the right time to discuss whether Scottish farmers should switch to using a higher percentage of their nitrogen fertiliser in the form of protected urea. The timing is also important because just last week, the UK government announced that they're going to do a consultation into the use of urea. And you'll understand after David's talk why the government is actually getting a wee bit concerned about ordinary urea and how it's being used. So we're fortunate to have Dr. David Wall as our main speaker. He's a true soil scientist, and he works for Teagasc at their Johnston Castle research station down over in Ireland. I've been following his practical research closely, but at a distance. I wasn't stalking him, and it certainly wasn't social distancing, but I have to confess that I've been using a lot of his research to boost knowledge transfer, certainly down in Wigtonshire, be that about the benefits of liming or interaction with phosphate. I found out that when you lime, the phosphate in the soil becomes more available from his research. Also, when you lime, it can be the same as putting 2 hundredweight of CAN 27% nitrogen on per acre. That's the response you can get, largely from mineralisation of the organic matter. Obviously, you have to take account of that whenever you look to work out your fertiliser requirements. Those are just two examples of the practical research he's been doing over the last few years. Early on tonight, I asked David, are you a farmer's son? Which I always says, I'm a farmer's son, but I'm actually a farmer. And I said, what do you mean? Oh, he says, I milk cows. I've got my own herd of 80 cows. He milks them. He does the milking every morning. So he's got very much a farmer's grasp of the science behind all this research. He was educated at UCD, University College Dublin, and did his first degree, Bachelor of Agricultural Science, in 2001. He followed that in 2004 with a Master's in Crop Science, also at UCD. And in 2008, he travelled across to America and undertook a PhD in soil science from North Carolina State University. He's a member of the Soil Science Society of Ireland, Soil Science Society of America, and also the Fertiliser Association of Ireland. As well, he has done a wealth of research, including variability in soil, nitrogen, phosphate availability in response to fertiliser and grassland soils, fertiliser and nitrogen requirement to optimise yield and quality of spring barley, and I could go on. But you're tuned in to hear about protected urea, and I've challenged David to frame his talk around why Scottish farmers should really be looking at this as an opportunity and grasping that as they go forward even next year and trying to decide what their nitrogen fertiliser use should be. And the only slide that I'll be presenting tonight, which is very unlike me, is that one that's in front of you, the price of nitrogen fertiliser. And before I actually delve into that, when you're looking at unit cost, it's not price per tonne with nitrogen, because all the nitrogen fertilisers have different quantities of nitrogen in them. What you're really wanting to get down into is the unit price. And the easy way to do that is very simple. You take the price of the fertiliser, and just if it's £225 a tonne, and you decide which fertiliser you're using, and if it was 34.5%, just add, multiply it by 10. So we've got the price of the fertiliser, say at £225 a tonne, and divide that by 345. And that tells me it's 65.2 pence per kilogram of nitrogen. And you can do the same thing with your urea. So although urea looks more expensive per tonne, there's more oomph in each bag. So if I just look at these prices, and these were got across Dumfries and Galloway, one from Dumfries end, one from the Stranraer end, and you'll see that ammonium nitrate contains 34.5% nitrogen, and it's anything from between 206 to 225 pound a tonne, working out 60-65 pence a kilo. Calcium ammonium nitrate, the 27% stuff, is about 189 pound a tonne, and it works out just over 70 pence per kilo. And urea at 46%, that's ordinary urea, 255 to 260 is 55 to 56 pence. So it's by far the cheaper option, and it's got a place, and largely because of the price, but we need to know when to use it and how to use it, and we'll hear about that tonight. Finally, protected urea. Yes, it's a bit more expensive than ordinary urea, but there's a reason behind that. And even with that, it works out between 61 and 63 pence a kilo, which isn't a far away. It's around the same price or marginally cheaper than ammonium nitrate. Thought I would just share that with you so that you have an idea of the price side. No money always focuses people's attention. But at this point, we're now ready, I think, to pass over to David and let him answer the challenge I've put to him. Why should Scottish farmers be thinking about using protected urea?
Look, thanks very much for the kind introduction. As Seamus said, we've done a little bit of research over the past while. Protected urea was one of the areas that we've looked at. It's an important technology, we feel, in terms of, I suppose, protecting farmers' livelihoods in terms of keeping their business sustainable. It's a good alternative to maybe some traditional fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers that you have been using, namely urea, maybe that you're using early or all year round for that matter, or ammonium nitrate, or other products there that you use mid-season. And I suppose where we're coming at this is there's a lot of pressure there and a lot of fingers being pointed at agriculture in terms of its environmental credentials. And there's no point in mincing words. That's a potential threat to your business in the long run if it causes the business to be clamped down on a little bit, or the marketability of the food that's produced in the business. So look, at the pressure is coming on agriculture to do its bit, like the other industries and society in general. Marketing food is becoming more and more of an issue, and I suppose finding those markets, and then also providing the evidence for the credentials. And we've looked at a few technologies, and what I want to present to you this evening is a little bit on nitrogen management in general, and then the protected urea pit, where that really fits in the system, and how you might be able to integrate that fairly seamlessly, I think, into your farming business, and reap the rewards, I suppose, in the long run. So without further ado, so if we move on. Okay, nutrients, including nitrogen fertiliser. Where are the signs pointing to over the next decade? And I suppose this is an important one for you as farmers to consider. You know, it's something, as Seamus has said there, it's something that has to be achieved there in terms of lowering emissions over the next decade. However, we also want to keep our farming businesses viable and to be able to feed our stock, grow our crops, etc. So what are the things that we must consider, and what's, I suppose, coming over our shoulders? At the European level, the strategies like the Farm to Fork strategy and the European Green Deal, what they're looking at is to act to reduce nutrient losses in general by 50%. And this is mainly in the area of water quality. Different governments will have their own nuanced targets within this, but at the larger level, that's kind of the types of reductions that we're looking at. And look, at 50% in terms of nutrient losses is a large target there. They've also signaled there how to achieve that. So that's the 50% in the water quality. However, they're mooting what we need to do is reduce fertilizers and fertilizer use by at least 20%. So if I were to say to you, or put it back to you as farmers in the morning, if you were to turn around next year in 2021 and take 20% of your fertilizer away, how would your farming business look? Would you be able to feed your stock? What effect does that have on your yields, etc.? So these are important considerations. Who knows what will come out in the wash, I suppose, in terms of where the final policy or the local policy will lie, but you probably can be sure that there's some kind of a cut coming in the near future. Why is the next question that I think anybody should ask or would ask, and the reasons that have been put forward, and I suppose the science corroborates it. Nutrients are not absorbed by plants to their fullest, and the residual nutrients that are left over in the soil are a source of air, soil, water, and climate impacts. The newly emerging one, anybody that's keeping a close eye on the news or on this finger to the pulse, fertilizers are also being, I suppose, blamed in terms of reducing biodiversity in rivers, lakes, wetlands, and seas. So the effect in terms of sensitive habitats, if fertilizers get into those, they can have detrimental effects. So I suppose we, as rural dwellers, we're drinking the water. You may have private wells. You may be on a public system. Some of you. You know, we are concerned as well, because we're the ones living in the rural areas. We're drinking the water, etc. And I don't think any farmer really wants to have a bad environment around their farming business. So look at this is what's coming down the tracks. A lot of text on this slide, a lot of information on this slide, but what I want to outline there's 11 different measures or 11 different management options that we have looked at in Ireland. It's called a marginal abatement cost curve, where you look at the cost of implementing the measure, and you look at the tons of CO2 that could be saved or abated based on the different measure or on implementing the measure. And if you look, I've broken down these measures into two main categories, but three main tranches. And the first suite of measures, number 1 to number 7, are soil and nitrogen management related options or managements. And you can see there in terms of those 7, the values in terms of megatons of CO2 that could be saved. So in terms of either a climate outcome or a greenhouse gas outcome, you can see there the bigger the number, the better the technology or the management option is for mitigating CO2 or carbon dioxide. And if you look down through the list there of the top 7, you can see the standout technology is changing nitrogen fertiliser type. And what we've looked at is, in Ireland, is switching 50% of calcium ammonium nitrate, in your case it could be ammonium nitrate, to a protected urea product. And that would give us 0.52 of a megaton, which is huge. If we look at the next 6 measures after that, number 2 to number 7 there, these measures such as draining wet mineral soils, using low emission slurry spreading as Seamus has talked about, increasing nitrogen use efficiency by applying lime, extending the grazing season so that we have less slurry to spread and less emissions from those animals while indoors, the inclusion of clover or legumes in the grazing area to fix its own nitrogen so that we don't have to use fertilizers, or the use of slurry amendments to stop some of the emissions out of the tanks. You can see there, when you add those next number 2 to number 6 together, they're not much more than the protected urea measure on its own. So at 0.59 megatons compared with 0.52 megatons. Also there, you'll see to the right-hand side, the costs associated with those measures. So on the fertilizer nitrogen type or the protected urea measure, we've calculated that would cost about €4 per tonne of CO2 saved, right? If we look at the next measures, we can see that drainage, of course, that's going to be costly. That's about €16. Low emission slurry spreading can be expensive if you have to get into the equipment, but then may pay off in the long run, is also expensive. Improving nitrogen use efficiency, where you have to use less nitrogen, is going to be cost beneficial. Extending the grazing season can be cost beneficial. The inclusion of clover can be relatively cost beneficial if you can maintain it in the sward. And obviously, where you have to put amendments into slurry is going to cost a little bit. Then we looked at 4 other measures which are to do with the animal side of the house. So improving dairy cow genetics, where you get better milk yield per cow, improving animal health, where you reduce the amount of replacements that you need in the herd. So those animals that are there but are not actually producing anything for the first couple of years of their life. Improved breeds in terms of maternal traits, in terms of beef. So you have better fat scores, better conversion of feed to live weight, beef genetics in terms of optimized live weight, and you can see those all have positive benefits in terms of lowering the CO2 or carbon footprint. However, they're slower to be realized. So if we think about 2030, the next decade, we might only breed those better genetics, improve the health status. It's probably going to take the full decade before those are realized, whereas we can switch over tomorrow or next year in terms of protected urea or employ low emission slurry spreading, etc. So these are just some of the measures. When we think about nitrogen sources, there's many nitrogen sources that we must consider, I suppose, on our farms. So we have biological nitrogen fixation in terms of legumes. Any that have white or red clover in your swards, you're getting the benefit there in terms of fixation. If you have over 20% or can maintain over 20% of the sward as white clover, we've shown in some of our grazing studies that those swards can fix up to 150 kilos of nitrogen. So in essence, we can reduce our fertiliser inputs, nitrogen inputs, by up to 150 kilos and still maintain the same stocking rate and feed efficiency of those. In terms of manure, mineral and organic nitrogen, you're well used to using those. And as Seamus said, you know, a little bit of a change there in terms of where the slurry goes, in terms of rate and timing, and moving more to the spring, we can get huge benefits there. And obviously with low emission slurry spreading, it means that less of the nitrogen is being lost to the atmosphere. So we can get credit for that and potentially reduce our nitrogen fertiliser bill. In terms of fertilisers, obviously I'm going to talk about protected urea tonight, but also in terms of improving nitrogen use efficiency by building soil fertility, having good swards, etc., is a key component here. And then obviously there is nitrogen being deposited from the atmosphere all the time, which, you know, does contribute to growing grass. And, you know, we can, in a fairly decent sward, we can grow probably 5-6 tons of dry matter with no nitrogen input, just as a base. Looking at the different fertiliser types then, potential nitrogen loss from the soil. So if we think about urea, and when we put on urea, so we're putting on urea maybe in the spring, traditional time, or maybe you're using it all year round. What happens to that urea before the plant gets a chance of taking it up? So first, you can see here, the urea goes on and goes in on top of the grass or down into the base of the grass onto the soil, and it takes up water. So it needs water for the prill or the granule to melt. And during that process of hydrolysis or taking on water, it's converted to ammonium, which is the first product that's plant available, right? However, during that process, if conditions are conducive, so if it's a warm, sunny day, the soil is relatively dry, we can get a large loss of nitrogen through ammonia emissions. And this is a problem for us. It's a problem for you as farmers because you're losing nitrogen, and we can lose, you know, up to 15-20% of the nitrogen if the conditions are really wrong. So when I say the conditions are really wrong, we get a partial melt of the urea granule. The sun is really high in the sky. There's drying conditions and it's good and windy. And they're the worst scenario for increasing ammonia loss or nitrogen loss through ammonia emissions. Why is ammonia emissions a problem? Beyond you losing nitrogen and losing some of your investment, ammonia emissions is also an air quality issue. So not a greenhouse gas in its own right, so doesn't contribute to climate change. However, that ammonia binds with particulate matter and can cause respiratory issues in terms of air quality, but also that ammonia can be redeposited on sensitive habitats. So maybe in sensitive areas, in wetlands, in rivers, or in lakes. And basically it acts as a nitrogen fertilizer source going into those areas. So usually our farmers are somewhat asked questions about, you know, ammonia, and the analogy that I usually use in terms of its issue in terms of air quality is, we'll say, calf housing. If you think about calf housing on the farm, probably the biggest improvement in calf housing over the last decade has been ventilation. And before there was good ventilation in calf houses, there was a lot of respiratory issues, maybe the onset of pneumonia in those calves because the air wasn't being turned over and clean air wasn't getting in there enough. And the issue here is ammonia emissions. So the calves, the bedding is wet. Those young calves, they're urinating a lot. There's a lot of urine or urea on the ground in that bedding. And if the ventilation is not good enough, that urea gets volatilized as ammonia, and that ammonia is going around the calf house and the calf is breathing it in, causing a respiratory problem. So that's just to give you that. Less of an issue in terms of nitrous oxide, although it does contribute to indirect emissions, and also fairly safe in terms of leaching, because the ammonia that's produced is positively charged and the soil is negatively charged, so they act like a magnet. The soil will hold on to that ammonia a lot better than it will hold on to something like ammonium nitrate, where the nitrate component could be leached out down into the water. So urea, higher risk of ammonia loss. If we think about an ammonium nitrate, or I have calcium ammonium nitrate fertiliser here, you can see the form of nitrogen is readily plant available straight away. So 50% is usually an ammonium form and 50% is a nitrate form. And the issue here in terms of an ammonium nitrate or a calcium ammonium nitrate is that nitrate. If the nitrate is applied to a wet soil, either in the spring of the year or in the back end of the year, that's going to contribute potentially to increased greenhouse gases through nitrous oxide. This gas here that's going up from the soil over time under wet conditions. The other issue here is if there's a lot of nitrate hanging around in the soil in the spring of the year and there's heavy rainfall, prolonged heavy rainfall, that potentially is going to be leached out and flows away down into the groundwater or off to the river, which is a loss again in terms of your business, but also a big issue in terms of the quality of the water. So is there alternatives to these products? So these are traditional products. They have a lot of favor with farmers. Farmers have a lot of experience using these fertilizers to good effect. However, is there any new kids in town, we'll call it, or new kids on the block in terms of nitrogen fertilizers that we can use and plug into our systems and still get good production with added benefits there in terms of the environment? And I suppose this is why protected urea, why protected urea now? And for the reasons that I've explained, we have issues there, society, government directions, regulations are demanding that the environment is protected. It's also been linked there with food quality, food marketability, that consumer now wants food that is sustainable. And I suppose this is why protected urea and a lot of interest in protected urea has come about in recent years. So we need to show progress towards reduced emissions. Protected urea is the largest single tool on the table. And I showed that in terms of the 11 measures above. In the morning, if we were to do something in an Irish context anyway, when we've run the figures, we've looked at the emission factors, and we've looked at the total reduction in carbon or in carbon footprint coming out of agriculture, we feel that protected urea is one of the biggest single tools in the toolbox. One of the good things about it, we can grow top yields, so there's no compromise in there in terms of your business or your yield. It costs less than ammonium nitrate, which is the mainstay of the nitrogen use in Ireland, at least. It can replace calcium ammonium nitrate or ammonium nitrate, so cost is on our side. The greenhouse gas reduction, we can reduce emissions there with no ill effect on the business. And in terms of ammonia, which is the bigger loss for our business, it holds on to the N to grow that grass. So again, there's no compromise there in terms of the amount of nitrogen that we have left in the soil that's available to grow that grass in the long run. And best of all, we can get credit for all this good work. So farmers, for the first time, can come around, change what they're doing with this product, and get the thumbs up from society, get the thumbs up from the regulator with no ill effects on the business. So what is protected urea? Or protected N urea has many different names. It's a urea nitrogen fertilizer, so typical to the urea that you've been using, made safe from ammonia loss, so from nitrogen loss, using a urease inhibitor. And this urease inhibitor is either on the surface of the granule or the prill, or it's into the melt. So it's internal and run through the granule. And to be honest, both methods are equally as effective as one another. So if we think about that urea, it's going through that hydrolysis process to the first plant available form of nitrogen, ammonium, and we want to stop that ammonia gas being lost as that's converted. And what happens here is the urea and the urease enzyme go together and release that ammonia gas. And what the urease inhibitor stops is it fills that site that the urea can't, or the urease enzyme can't attack the urea and create ammonia gas. Very simple, and you can see it here. So usually the urease enzyme would attack the urea, and that fills in the slot here. However, we're putting this urease inhibitor into that slot, so the urea is free and unaffected by the enzyme, which creates the gas. In terms of urease inhibitors, there's three main types currently registered under EU fertiliser regulations. There's NBPT, or Agritane, which is the trade name from Cork Agricultural Services and others. There's many others selling that now currently, probably in your neck of the woods as well. There's NBPT and NPPT, so it's two actives, and that's a product from BASF. And again, many of your fertilizer companies may have that product. And then there's 2-NPT, which is another type of inhibitor, and that's from SKW. So again, just so that you're aware, there's three main types of actives out there, and probably more to come in the next few years. But when you're getting these fertilizers, you should just check that there's some of these products, that the inhibitor that you're buying or purchasing has some of these products in it, and then you're fairly safe to know that you're onto a winner. In Ireland, as I'm sure will be the case, or is the case in Scotland and elsewhere in the UK, the Ministry for Agriculture carry out surveillance to check that the regulatory levels are met at the point of sale. So again, this is regulated. It's the same as your fertilizer. So you can be fairly confident that you're buying, you're paying, what you're paying for is what it says on the tin, you know, so that you're getting the full value in terms of these inhibitors. Just in terms of the current scenario in Ireland, obviously it's going to be different up your neck of the woods. There are plenty of options. So the fertilizer industry has come on board with this. We have up to 18 options from 6 different fertilizer companies or fertilizer agents in Ireland. We keep a list of these for farmers and for advisors there as they come on board, because there's new ones coming on stream every year. But just so that you're aware, there is different products there. All of these are protected urea products, and you can see there in terms of N, K, and S, there's very many different combinations. One thing that you will note here is that there is no combination currently with phosphorus in it. And the issue here is that in storage, those inhibitors that I talked about in the previous slide, so these ones here, these are not currently compatible with phosphorus in the products that we have in Ireland anyway. Now, there may be some emerging products there, and it's something that you should ask if you're getting a product with phosphorus in it. But currently, in an Irish context, we have no compounds with protected urea in them as the base nitrogen source, because the phosphorus is antagonistic towards the inhibitor and will break it down during storage in the bag. So again, just be aware, ask the question if you are being sold that, And it may very well be that the new technologies are out and that you're ahead of the game compared with where we are in Ireland. The other thing to consider there is there's very many of these products that have sulfur in them. And this is something that we're doing a lot of work on at the moment in terms of the need for sulfur. Traditionally, like yourselves, you know, we haven't used as much sulfur. The arable industry has used a lot of sulfur because of lower organic matter, etc. We're close to the sea in most places on the island of Ireland, so there's a little bit of sulfur deposition, but what we have noticed there as nitrogen use has gone up and nitrogen intensity per hectare or per acre has gone up, the need for sulfur is more and more. And look at these products, all have a product with a sulfur in it, so it's worth considering that as well. Okay, just very quickly, I don't want to spend too long on the research, but just to give you some of the research, some of the facts in terms of how well or otherwise the protected urea is working. We've I suppose since 2013 we've been doing a lot of work on these. We've looked at the gaseous emissions, and we've also looked at the agronomy of protected urea versus calcium ammonium nitrate and versus standard urea. And the first issue that we have is with urea is a big emitter of ammonia during dry weather. So that's its downfall. It's a good product otherwise. So how can we, what products can we look at, I suppose, in terms of reducing those potential ammonia losses, which are big targets in Ireland, and I'm sure they're big targets over your way as well. And in the research there, we were finding that on urea, on average, spread over the year, we were getting about 16% of the nitrogen being lost as ammonia. So if I was to say to you, if you spread 100 kilos of nitrogen as urea per hectare, we were losing 15 kilos of that on average as ammonia. So look at, I'm a farmer myself. It's not something that I'd be jumping up and down about in terms of, I wouldn't be overjoyed to know that I'm losing 15% of my investment. When I look at CAN, that's the natural choice. I suppose it's tried and tested. It's been around for an age. And you can see there, that had 85% reduction in terms of ammonia loss. So out of a CAN product, if I was spreading 100 kilos, I'm only losing 2.3 kilos in terms of ammonia. So very, very little. I'd probably leave more in the fertiliser spreader than I'd lose. However, when we looked at the protected urea product, we're in the same territory as the CAN or the ammonium nitrate. We're down around 79% reduction in terms of ammonia loss. So essentially, the protected urea is doing what it says on the tin. It's reducing the ammonia loss, keeping the nitrogen on the ground in the soil where we want it for plant uptake. So again, a better product to be using all year round than a straight urea, especially through dry weather. When we look at nitrous oxide, which is the greenhouse gas, it's the one that the media and everybody else is talking about at the moment. You know, Joe Public is looking at this. They're worried about climate change. They're worried about the future. And agriculture has its bit to do in terms of this, or has been expected to do. And you can see there, overall, the loss is going to be very low. So loss of total nitrogen is going to be very low. However, that total nitrogen that's lost as nitrous oxide is extremely potent as a greenhouse gas. And when we look at the three products again here, we see that this time urea is performing very favorably in terms of greenhouse gases. However, ammonium nitrate or calcium ammonium nitrate is the big offender. That's the one that's fallen down in terms of greenhouse gases. However, the protected urea is still doing what it says on the tin. It's keeping greenhouse gases to a minimum. So if we look across these two figures here, the only one that's down for both ammonia and for nitrous oxide is actually the protected urea. It's ticking both boxes, reducing ammonia losses and also reducing greenhouse gas losses. In terms of yield, which is always a concern in terms of farmers and that, we looked at this at 3 sites, 3 different soil types over a 3-year period. In the initial study, and these are the results of the initial study, we looked at 5 different application rates, and we applied the nitrogen at 6 different times over the year. And you can see here in terms of the yields, the yield is going up as the nitrogen fertiliser rate is going up. We can see here we started off with 100 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, 100 kilograms per hectare. We were producing about 9 tons of grass dry matter. When we got up to 300, 400, 500 kilos there, we were producing about 14 tons of dry matter. However, what you can see here, there is no difference between the ammonium nitrate or the calcium ammonium nitrate in this case, the urea or the protected urea when used correctly at appropriate rates. So you can see there, protected urea doesn't show any major benefit here over these studies in terms of yield. However, it's comparable with traditional nitrogen fertilizer sources, so it's not showing any losses either. When we take that a step further and we look at nitrogen recovery, so this is nitrogen uptake, so of the fertilizer that's applied, the amount that's recovered back up into the plant or into the grass. You can see here at higher nitrogen rates, there's a bit of a change here in terms of the lines. So the urea line here in the blue triangles is beginning to deviate, and we have a slightly lower nitrogen recovery or nitrogen uptake from that urea. And possibly this is due to the losses of some of the nitrogen as ammonia. And you can see there in terms of calcium ammonium nitrate or ammonium nitrate and the protected urea product, they are bang on one another. You can't tell any difference. So again here, the protected urea has as good, if not better, nitrogen recovery than the traditional nitrogen fertilizer sources. So again, another, I suppose, positive in terms of protected urea. We took this a step further and we looked in terms of a grazing trial across 2 sites, so 2 farms, 2 dairy farms, stock. There's 40 cows in each treatment, 40 dairy cows in the different treatments. So 3 farmlets here, 1 farmlet being run on calcium ammonium nitrate, 1 farmlet being run on protected urea, and 1 farmlet being run on urea. And those 3 herds then were kept and rotated within paddocks on the farm that were applied with these 3 different nitrogen treatments. And you can see there, over the first year of this study, this was this year, you can see there the 3 bars representing the green in can, the protected urea in this lighter green color, and then the ordinary urea in the orange or brown color. And you can see there in the spring, no big differences between the treatments. However, you will notice when we get out into dry weather here in May and June, and we had a very droughty weather in May and June, you can see here the urea is beginning to fall off, and we're beginning to get less yield in terms of those grazing rounds, less biomass being produced. And what's happening in here is we're getting increased nitrogen losses from the straight urea during the dry weather. And as I've said to you, the dry, sunny day with low grass cover is the worst scenario in terms of using urea and for nitrogen losses. So again, a problem. And then in the back at the end of the year, no major differences. So again, This also proves to us, and should be of some comfort to farmers there, in terms of we can use the protected urea, plug it into the system, go out in dry weather or in wetter weather, and see no ill effects and still produce the same amount of grass growth. One step further there, we also looked at the actual emissions, when these emissions are happening once the fertiliser is spread. Here, what we're looking at is nitrogen loss here in terms of grams per hectare per hour. So these are hours, and these are days after fertiliser application. And what you can see here in terms of the three different coloured lines, so the can in blue, the protected urea in this red colour, and the urea in the green colour, immediately after spreading, if you get that dry, warm weather after the urea granule or prill has melted, we're going to get a massive loss. And these are grams per hour, remember. A massive loss of nitrogen immediately after the urea is spread. So if you're using urea and you have experience using urea, you'll know that a little drop of rain right after you spread urea is going to be a great help to getting that urea granule melted and washed into the soil, and to get the best benefits out of that urea. However, during this same trial, during this dry weather, you can see there the protected urea is doing exactly what it says on the tin. It's reducing the ammonia losses, and there's no difference between the losses from it and the calcium ammonium nitrate, or ammonium nitrate for that matter. So again, it is doing what it says on the tin. The product is working, and we've shown that in numerous trials. Back to what Seamus showed earlier on, these are in euro per kilo of N. It is important to look and to break down the different fertilizers into how much a kilo of nitrogen is costing, rather than going on the total cost per ton of product. Because it does give you a distorted view, and you may end up, calculating or thinking, God, that's more expensive than the other. When we look in Ireland in terms of protected urea versus a calcium ammonium nitrate, you can see there per kilo of N that we're purchasing, it's favourable. So 84 cent per kilo of N versus a calcium ammonium nitrate, which most farmers will have been using, is about 89 cent per kilo of N at current prices. The other big thing to think about here is work rate. So if you fill up your fertiliser spreader with protected urea or with a urea product, you're going to go a lot further and cover more hectares or more acres per fill, which is economies in terms of labour, in terms of diesel, and also in terms of haulage and other things. So again, it's worth calculating. We looked at a big bag of calcium ammonium nitrate, 500 kilo bag, versus a 375 kilogram bag of protected urea. You might say, okay, there's less fertilizer in that bag. However, the concentration there is higher. It's 46% N versus a 27% N. So the total nitrogen in that bag is only 135 kilos in the calcium ammonium nitrate bag versus 172 kilos in the protected urea bag. And in terms of putting out 30 kilos per hectare of an application rate, we're covering 4.5 hectares with the calcium ammonium nitrate. However, we're able to cover 5.7 hectares with the protected urea. So it is a consideration there in terms of work rate. Finally then, in terms of the picture in Ireland, what needs to be done to realise, I suppose, these changes, these lower emissions, etc. For us in Ireland, this is 29 breakdown of fertiliser sales nationally. And you can see there the two big fertiliser sales for nitrogen are calcium ammonium nitrate, and in terms of urea and other main nitrogen sources, are high-end compounds and urea compounds. And you can see there, protected urea is a smaller proportion in 2019. However, what's happened in 2020 is this market has grown. We're probably more like 15% of the total nitrogen this year is a protected urea. And we hope that that will grow more and more as time goes on, obviously 2030 being the target. And the only way we can reap these benefits if more farmers vote with their feet and basically go out and purchase the product and reduce the amount of, I suppose, the other straight nitrogen products that are being used. Finally then, just to finish off, in terms of nitrogen advice, one soil definitely doesn't fit all. We need to consider the soil type, the drainage status of that soil, and then how that's going to affect what nitrogen we put into the soil. If we look at nitrogen fertiliser requirements, it's really important to know your land. Obviously, it's your land, you'll probably know it best. However, one of the things that we're looking at the moment is the different grass growth curves in different fields or different land types or different areas of the country. And this is really important in terms of early nitrogen, how early we go, in terms of the nitrogen rates that we put out, and then in terms of also matching the fertiliser to the land type to what the potential of the ground is. If we think about the green line here, this is a typical nitrogen uptake for dry land in Ireland. And you can see there in terms of kilos of nitrogen per hectare per day, from up to about the 1st or the 5th of March, what I would usually say to Irish farmers is up to St. Patrick's Day, the 17th of March. The uptake of nitrogen is very, very low. Even in the south, it's very, very low. So is it prudent to be going out with big application rates of nitrogen from early January, when it's fair game, when you're allowed to do it legally, up to the middle of March? And the answer is probably no. If you look at these grass growth rates, the return on investment or the return in terms of the nitrogen uptake is very low. So the question is, should you have it hanging out there in the soil during that period where it's potentially more prone to loss? Here, obviously, the nitrogen responses per day are a lot higher, and you can see peak growth there, where typically you'd be taking off your first cut silage there. You need probably, you have growth rates there of over 2 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per day. So again, it stands to reason for that silage crop, they need to be fertilized. There's little losses. However, protected urea, if the weather is dry, can be a good option. The other thing there is to look at the background soil nitrogen release through mineralization. And as Seamus has alluded to, the research that we've looked at it there is by getting your pH right, hitting that pH of 6 or up to 6.3 for grassland, and for those of you that have arable crops, up to 6.5 of a pH, that will help you release up to in the region of 70 to 80 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year, which, you know, is in today's money, you're talking about 50 to 60 quid there that you've saved in terms of nitrogen fertilizer. So what we're trying to do here then is fill the gap between what the soil can supply and what the grass can grow over the year. So you can see there, different fertilizer rates are needed at different times of the year, but we need to be cautious in here, and we also need to be cautious here in the back end. If we look at this very briefly in terms of two grass growth curves, the first one here is a typical dryland soil, so a mineral soil, well-drained mineral soil, and you can see there you have a gradual warm up in the spring. You hit peak growth there coming into March, April when the frosts are gone, and then it's beginning to drop off there from August to September in the back end. I tend to split the year into 4 parts: the spring, being the lowest response part, the first cut silage there being part 2. If you're taking out second cut silage being part 3 of the year, and then the back end of the year where you're trying to build grass growth covers so that you can extend the grazing season. And if we look at a typical fertiliser programme in terms of this dryland soil liming, we need to take every opportunity when the cattle or sheep or whatever you have on this system are off the land, or after silage time when you have the bare stubble, to get some lime out if needed. Then in terms of the first part, either a protected urea or a slurry application is probably okay there coming into February onwards, because this soil is dry. There's plenty of opportunities for air to get in because it's not saturated. And if the warm day, the air gets into the soil temperature will begin to go above that critical 5 degrees, and grass will begin to grow. And again, by offsetting some of the fertiliser with slurry there in terms of a couple of rounds, or a compound there before peak growth to give the soil a helping hand, that's a perfect timing there in terms of getting your compound in. And then as we go through the next part of the year, if your soil fertility is low, we probably need to give the soil a helping hand there mid-season when we're getting that peak growth, upwards of 70, 80, maybe even 100 kilos of growth per day. And again, we can safely put in protected urea or protected urea plus sulfur there and balance the system in terms of NPK and S. Also then in terms of build-up, that can be both front-loaded in terms of P and in terms of potash by backloading it, and you don't run into any issues there in terms of grass tetany or problems in terms of animal health. However, if we think about the poorly drained soils, the situation has to be thought about a little bit different. So we get poorer grass growth in the spring because the soil is damp and wet. Once the soil is saturated, the air can't get into it to warm it up. Again here, that means that our fertiliser regime is going to start much later. However, you'll also notice here that probably on these poorly drained soils, peak growth is probably higher. So we have a narrower grass growth season, but grass growth is more rapid during that season. And again, if we break the year down into 4 parts, you can see there that lime is probably going to be a pursuit for the second half of the year when soils have dried up, when you can travel there with the heavy lime equipment and the spreader, and when the season opens up in terms of you have more grass, the grazing round is that bit longer after the silage comes out, etc. Again, we're starting much later, and we can start with a compound on these if your soil fertility is low, right before, well-timed, right before this peak here begins, so that we have enough power in the soil to drive that peak as high as we can go, so that we can take out silage and still feed the grazing livestock. Then a protected urea type product, come back in here if we have more work to do in terms of a compound to drive that peak growth, give the soil a helping hand, and then in terms of the back end of the year, go in with a protected urea or a protected urea plus sulfur to finish out the year. Again, this is an idealized fertilizer program. I've picked a dairy one just because it was available to me, and we looked at it in terms of what that looks like over the year. If our total advice is up to 250 kilos of fertilizer N, 39 kilos of P, 95 kilos of K, and 15 kilos of sulfur per hectare, how does that look in terms of product choice, etc.? What I've picked here is in February is to start out with 25 kilos of a protected urea product. In terms of the next product, I'm putting in a compound there to drive that peak, to give the soil a helping hand when it's cold and damp. And I'm putting out a traditional 18-6-12 type product, NPK plus sulfur. And you can see there about 56 kilos of nitrogen going in that March in 1 or 2 splits. In April, then I'm back into a protected urea, probably with some sulfur in there. Then again, coming back in with a compound there if my soil fertility is anyway low, or at least to balance it up, and back in then with a couple of rounds of protected urea in the back end. And overall, that type of a program is costing me somewhere in the region of €343 per hectare, and I'm hitting my targets in terms of the advice all around. So it can be done by moving away from an ammonium nitrate or a can type situation where you can use straight protected urea and still mind your soil fertility in terms of using your compounds interspersed there at different splits. So in summary, why protected urea? Why now? We need to show progress towards reduced emissions as an agricultural sector. Protected urea is the largest single tool on the table that we've looked at. We've looked at many tools. In terms of yield, it grows top yields, no different than any of the others. In terms of cost, we can get economies there in terms of reducing our costs. In terms of greenhouse gases, we get to reduced emissions, we can tick that box. In terms of ammonia being the air quality, we can hold on to that end, we can grow the grass, and we can, I suppose, protect your neighbours, the habitats, etc. around your farm. And best of all, by doing this, making this change on the farm, we can get credit for reduced emissions, increased sustainability, and I suppose in terms of that green image of agriculture, we can preserve that and you know, make things work in our favour, and I suppose have a little bit of a voice, come out and say, you know, the naysayers who are there to knock and to say, you know, agriculture is bad, fertilizers are bad, etc. We can say this is the right choice. We've made the conscientious choice. We've done the right thing, and take credit for it. So with that, I've certainly talked for long enough. I'm happy to take any questions.
The questions have been coming thick and fast, and I'll just ask Craig that if you can put those up on the screen so I'm able to see them like you did before. One question I want to kick off with, though, is the practical aspect. I remember whenever urea first came out, I'm old enough to remember it coming out way back in the mid-80s, and there was a whole issue about the spreading width and the density of the material. What are you finding at practical level? What's your advice to your farmers in terms of spreading width? Do you have to adjust the spreader, etc.? Yeah,
certainly, Seamus, it is a concern. Farmers have raised it, especially contractors have raised it, those that are bulk spreading, etc. And it still is a concern in terms of bout width. What we can find, it's probably less of a problem in terms of grassland compared with tillage, because the bout widths are not quite as wide. We're happy with the protected urea product in terms of a good granule, well shaped, that we can spread probably in the region of 30 meters, 35 meters, maybe up to 40 meters without major issues, as long as there's not too much wind. However, it does take recalibration of the spreader. And what has been the issue in the past is, and even recently, is guys that have gone out used to spreading calcium ammonium nitrate or ammonium nitrate type product, didn't adjust the spreader, didn't adjust maybe the veins on the spreader, etc. So it's not set up for a urea type product. And what's happened there is when the fertilizer drops, it's hitting the veins and crushing and basically getting stuck and not being spread equally. So look, it's certainly an issue. The other big issue there is in blends, where you're spreading in blends with it's not a CCF. A lot of our fertilizers are blended with the P and K. They're heavier materials, so the rock derivatives, they will go further than the urea in that blend, and then you get striping and you get uneven application. So again, I think fertilizer spreading is fertilizer setup is key. And also then what we're trying to do at the moment is divorce some of the compounds and you've seen there in terms of the type of a program that I presented, keep the fertiliser separate, and there's plenty of options to do that where you don't have to be trying to apply your K and your S with the nitrogen. Use it in the different splits, and that can be work to your favour.
Okay. I remember doing something like that 40 years ago at home. Just on that though, there'll be no difference between urea and protected urea in terms of its spreadability and width. It's still a light product. Maybe just make us all pause a wee bit and think, do we recalibrate at the moment whenever we go out to spread urea compared to how we're spreading ammonium nitrate or can? So that's maybe one take-home message just to think about. It's not just a case of putting the bag into the fertiliser spreader and driving on, be that urea or protected urea. Maybe we should be doing a bit of calibration just now. Anyway, I'm going to start off with some questions. The first one that come in, I think you answered it to a certain extent, but I'll fire it back. If soil pH was increased to a pH of 6.3, how much more efficient would the fertiliser use be, and how much nitrogen could you actually cut back on?
A very good question, and something that our farmers have been asking us since, I suppose, that increased emphasis on lime and the new research came out. In 2016, 17 and 18, we took 22 farms and we measured the soil fertility on each paddock on those farms. So in total, 460 fields, or 463 fields to be exact, and we followed those for those 3 years in terms of nitrogen uptake, nitrogen recovery. On average, where the pH was low, so it was down below 5.8, we are getting about 40% nitrogen use efficiency, as low as 40% on average.
Okay.
Where we, by making no other change other than increasing the pH to the target of 6.3 or above, we're doubling that efficiency up to 67%. That's not correcting the P and K status and not doing anything else. Just by changing the pH, we're going from around 30% up to 67% within a year or a year and a half that it takes that lime to really bed in and work. So it's cheap as chips. It's an old technology. It's been around for an age. It's proven. However, we struggle with adoption here too. And I suppose the biggest impediment to lime that I can see is logistics and a little bit of planning.
Because that's not a good take-home message, sort your lime. I think we've been pushing that for the last 2 or 3 years, certainly down in Stranraer. I think most farmers are now reacting to that, but there still probably isn't enough lime going on. I have an old take-home message I'll keep banging on. It's you need to be putting on 2 tonne every 5 years to stand still, 2 tonne per acre every 5 years to stand still. So work that out how many acres you've got and divide that by 5 years, and that's the amount of lime. And yet, as David has pointed out, just how important it is for all these other nutrients. Right.
And you know, what I'm quoting there is not the research plot experiment. It's actually real farms. Those are the average across these real farms, and the farmers were shocked.
Okay. Right. Again. Okay. What about liquid fertilizer use? Are there still losses with that? I suppose with the liquid nitrogen, liquid urea.
Yeah. So look at there may be some. Usually those liquids are going onto the leaf. There's a lot more absorbance of that liquid into the plant through the leaf and that kind of deal, so they can be more efficient. However, if that urea gets to the soil, then you're exposed to the same loss pathways. So again, there's going to be a certain amount going on the soil, of course. We can increase more efficiency and more accuracy in terms of spread with liquid fertilizers. However, they're probably not used in every scenario, certainly not as much used in an Irish context. But again, the same principles apply, and if it gets to the soil, there's potentially an ammonia loss there with the urea in a liquid form.
Okay, I think that answers another question as well. Right, if the urea is protected, can you not increase the application rate and reduce the number of passes?
Okay, it's a good question, and it's a good practical question there. To answer that question, I kind of describe in terms of that protection and that time lag on that protection. So basically, the protection happens, as I said, as I showed in the figure there. The losses happen very quickly after the urea melts or is applied, right? So it's probably happening there within the first 10 days, or certainly within, if the urea melts, within the first 24 hours. But if we say on the outset, it's about 10 days that we need protection, because that's the period that the loss will happen. So the inhibitor is not a slow release fertilizer. It's just protecting us for that period of maybe a week, maybe up to 10 days. So essentially there, to answer that question then, you probably wouldn't apply enough fertilizer to do you for 2 rounds. We'll say you're on an intensive grazing round at peak season, say that your grazing round was 20 days growth, and 2 rounds would be 40 days. You're probably not going to put out an application there, maybe 60 kilos per hectare, to last you for that 40 days, because there's going to be losses from that. So essentially, that's not what it is. It's not for a slow release fertilizer. It's just to protect for the immediate period after spreading, when the losses are likely to be high. I hope that answers the question.
That is that question. It's something that probably was ingrained into us, and there's a question that's relevant to that. They said, is there any point in using protected urea in a damp spring over ordinary urea from a grass growth point of view? I know you showed that, but we've got in our head that urea safe to use in the spring, full stop. But your comments on that? Yeah, so a very good question. Our farmers ask the same thing, so they're all clued in here in terms of what's going on. Technically, I would say if you're following the weather, urea is a perfect product, right? There's going to be no difference if the emissions, if you're going out on an overcast day where the sun is not splitting the stones. So when I say to our farmers, the best day to spread slurry, especially if you're spreading with a splash plate, is when the wipers on the tractor are intermittent, right? So it's not raining, you're not going to get wash off or whatever, but it's one of those muggy down days where there's emissions are going to be low. The same thing applies in terms of using urea in the spring. If you have enough moisture around, it's not raining to wash it off, you're going to melt that, get it into the soil where it's protected in the soil, and there's going to be low losses. Our biggest issue here in terms of regulation and in terms of audit is they don't differentiate which day you spread it and how effective. So technically you can maximize the benefit by following the weather, picking your day to spread on your farm. However, if we think about the national inventory where all the fertilizer types, the total quantity is collated or is summed up, and then an emission factor is applied to it, if there's so many thousand tons of urea in that calculation, it has a much higher emission factor. So its calculation factor is a lot higher than protected urea, which equates then to a much bigger emission. Because nobody's going to call out to your farm to say, did you spread it before rain? Did you spread it on this day? And if we were to keep those kind of records, it would be a nightmare. So the issue now, it comes down to audit, it comes down to calculations, and it's not the technical issue. So to answer in short, if you're good and you're following the weather, you can get very high efficiency from urea fertilizers in the spring. However, protected urea gives you more flexibility to spread in any weather. Okay, so, following on from that, there's a question about using protected urea. If we are going to be putting on lime, can it be applied after liming? Because there's obviously issues with urea and liming.
Yeah, so good question again. Obviously, lime and ordinary urea is a big no-no. It's kind of cart before the horse. You either apply the urea in the spring and you lime later, because if you apply urea in on lime ground, those pockets of high pH will drive the losses of nitrogen much higher, right? So with protected urea, we've done some work. It's not all completed or whatever, but the first 2 years of work show that protected urea is actually protecting us with lime, so we have that flexibility. Where you apply lime, it's not published yet, but based on 2 years of research so far, we're looking and the results are showing that protected urea is also protecting us from those losses post-lime. So we can lime and then go with protected urea, whereas we can't do it with ordinary urea.
Right, and just to clarify, with calcium ammonium nitrate or ammonium nitrate and lime, there's no issue there, is it?
There is no issue there. No issue there at all, because the losses there's not an antagonism or a trade-off there with pH in the lime. So no,
I don't want all these guys fired up to go and spread lime, and then they're also spreading ordinary urea, and we're not getting the benefit of it.
Yeah, no, and that's a very important point there. That if we're liming, our rule of thumb in Ireland, I don't know what yours is, Seamus, but our rule of thumb is we leave at least 3 months post lime before we go back in with urea, and that's to cover that's to cover liming in the summer. In the summer, that where you don't get wash in. Probably you could safely do it if you limed in the back end. You probably could go with urea in the spring, because you're going to get enough wash in.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Right. Does protected urea affect soil microbes or water quality?
Yeah, so another good question. It's something that our food industry is very, very, I suppose, protective of, to make sure that protected urea is not causing a problem in terms of sustainability, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of how they can label the food, and also the food safety itself. So we have the trial that started in 2013. We've maintained those 3 sites with repeated applications of protected urea each year. And we went in last year after approximately 7 years of constant protected urea program use, looked at soil microbiology, and what we can see is no effects compared with an ammonium nitrate or a calcium ammonium nitrate or a urea treatments that are side by side in that trial. So to date, we can see no ill effects. The inhibitor doesn't last in the environment, so it's broken down very quickly within that 7 to 10 days and doesn't persist. The other benefit that we're seeing is by using a protected urea product with that higher nitrogen uptake in the grass that we see, we're actually losing less to water. So in our leaching studies, we're seeing that there's less nitrogen being lost to water. It's not much less than urea, to be honest, because the urea is going up, the losses are going up. By maintaining more nitrogen in the soil, the grass is recovering more, and we're actually losing less downwards as well into the water. So I would say it's showing up under the current research. It's showing up to be not much different than traditional other fertilizers that we've been used to using. It's relatively safe both in terms of biodiversity, and it may have benefits in terms of water. Okay.
Back on to the liquid fertilizer, would there be any environmental benefit of using liquid fertilizer, then prilled or granulated, I suppose, nitrogen again?
Certainly, if I suppose in the spring you felt that you were able to get out with liquid fertilizer, put out a lower rate during that risky period and get it straight into the plant more efficiently, there's potential for cutting the rates in spring that you would traditionally have been going with a solid fertiliser. And then once the soils warm up and those lost periods go away, going with a prill or a granule after that from March onwards. So it could be a strategy. In terms of Irish farmers, they're probably not set up to do both, especially the grassland farmers. Maybe some of the arable farmers are, but traditionally they're either all on liquid, which is very few, or they're all on solid. So it probably is more of a contractor type scenario. But so certainly it's I think this kind of thinking is what's going to be needed in the future. Is maybe doing things a little bit different than we did, small tweaks like just that.
Okay, and you see the actual products themselves. Are the inhibitors regulated? Is it just those three companies or three? You flagged up there 16 companies, 16 fertilizers from those three, or is it just the three companies?
No, those are the three manufacturers of the inhibitors, yes.
Right, and then that's available to all and then presumably there's some form of policing that.
Yes.
How do we know the actual right inhibitors in?
Yeah, and look, this is also a concern. The way it happens in Ireland, and I'm sure it'll be the same in your neck of the woods with either the ministry or whoever is in charge of the fertiliser side of the house. The way it's gone here is it's a little bit like pesticides. So we have the checks and balances. They go around and they whoever the distributor or merchant is, if they have product in their yard, they're liable for inspection. They have to prove that their products are ship-shape and that the labels are correct, etc. And our ministry goes around and does an audit in terms of those that are actually producing fertilizers or blending fertilizers or bagging fertilizers, that they will call around to those before fertilizers are released each year in a blind inspection, so they can call in at any stage, check and bring samples away with them. So it is fully regulated. The European and national fertilizer regulations. So we have European fertilizer regulations, but we also have our national regulations, like you will have as well. These inhibitors have also been brought into the fold on those. So they might be new to us, but these inhibitors, these products have been around for a long time, like some of the pesticides. However, it's only now that they're beginning to be rolled out, but they have been through all the testing and regulations. And in terms of the products that are being released on the market, there is audit and there is control, quality control over those.
I think I read somewhere that a third of all the urea products sold in the UK or the United States, which must be a fair amount, are protected urea. So they've obviously embraced it and gone into it.
Yeah, it's the same thing in New Zealand. We look a lot towards, I suppose, yourselves and to what's happening in terms of a grassland climate where they're pretty similar. You're a little bit colder than we are in parts, but and we also look to New Zealand there in terms of what they're doing, and they're up to 40% of their nitrogen, straight nitrogen, is actually in the form of protected urea at this stage. So they're well ahead of us.
We're bounced about a wee bit. We're back into slurry spreading. We've had a fair drive, thanks, I think, to the Scottish Government producing or helping farmers invest in larger slurry stores. They still need to be emptied and emptied at the right time. Question here, slurry spreading in spring is difficult if slurry is stored below slats. What do you suggest? So we're just trying to get it out at the right time, and maybe the ground conditions aren't suiting. So although I'm saying try and spread more slurry at the right rate, still not more heavier dressings necessarily. And we found certainly spreading it on land that is further away from the steading, which has tended to be neglected. But comments on that, David, as a practical farmer?
It's much the same here, Seamus. I think the question is very warranted. We've done some costings on spreading slurry and that long draw, that outside block, that maybe where silage is coming in from, because it's away and you're prepared to draw silage back to the homestead. However, you're not prepared to draw slurry back to it. And the big issue there for that we can see when we test that ground and look at the at how that ground is performing, it's getting a good program usually in terms of bag fertiliser. However, what it needs is carbon. So if we think about, it's been constantly cut. Each cut of silage, a heavy cut of silage, 5-6 tons of dry matter coming off that is going to reduce the amount of carbon. And each ton of dry matter, you know, you have about 75 kilos of carbon coming off in each cut. So over a period of 5-10 years, the organic matter in that soil mightn't actually change that much from a test. However, the quality of that organic matter, you're actually taking all the good stuff out of it. All that labile, that plant available organic matter and the stuff that the bugs like to chew on is all gone. And you'll find that yields begin to tumble on that outside block, and also swards begin to go backwards in terms of you've maybe put in good ryegrasses or good clovers or whatever on those swards, and they begin to revert to type to wheat grasses or other grasses. And the issue for us, we've looked a lot at this, and it's a carbon issue, that there's no substitute for carbon, and the slurry that's been, or the silage that's been brought in has a P to K ratio of about 1:6. Right, so if we think about the grass that's brought in per ton of dry matter that's carted in, it has about 4 to 5 kilos of phosphorus and somewhere in the region of 25 to 30 kilos of potash in it. The slurry has the very same ratio. 1,000 gallons of cattle slurry is equivalent to, spread by low emission slurry spreading, is equivalent to a bag of 9,530. A 50 kg bag of 9,530, and the ratio there, 5 is to 30, is the same ratio as the grass is. So it's the perfect fertilizer to go back on that silage ground. When we look at draw, the cost of drawing, if you take low emission slurry spreading, I'm going to use euros, but you can convert it afterwards in your own minds. A contractor to do a round trip, one load in an hour with a fairly big tank, 3,000 to 5,000 gallons in one tank, he has roughly at 3,000 gallons, he probably has €75 behind the tractor in terms of fertilizer value. That's not including the carbon in it. And if he's able to make one trip in the hour, we'll say at a modest cost, we'll say you're getting a contractor in, he's costing you €65 an hour, you're still winning. And you're offsetting fertilizer, you're maintaining your silage sward, you're putting back the carbon where you can maintain the yield. And what I would say, that's the perfect scenario. So there should be some costing done on it. It's the one place that's, I suppose, mined in terms of its nutrients. So the other thing then, getting back to the question, look, it is tricky, especially where storage is tight, to hold the slurry for an extra couple of weeks, maybe even a month, to use it when you want to use it, rather than getting it out because you have to get it out. And this is a conundrum for us. A lot of herds have expanded, especially dairy farms. Storage is very tight, and it means then that come the 15th of January, it's a matter of getting it out because they have to, because you're at the top of the slats. For me, I think a fertilizer plan is really key here, even if it's local ground around the yard, that it just doesn't go on the pet field. The pet field around the yard is the shortest draw. It probably has the best drainage because you can travel with the tanker on it, and it's the one that gets plastered in January and early February. Yeah. However, the nutrients, if you look at your soil test results, that's probably not in need of nutrients. So there is options there in terms of following the first round in terms of grazing plots. It's not convenient for getting a lot out, but if you can get 3 or 4 loads out rather than emptying the whole tank, put them where they need to go, where you're going to get the benefit in terms of offset and fertiliser, hold on for a few weeks, hopefully conditions get better, and then spread another 3 or 4 loads. I know it doesn't suit in terms of a contractor coming in, it doesn't suit in terms of workload, but it's probably a prudent way to do it. And it's just another take on it. Look, there's no perfect answer.
Yeah, I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the fertiliser value we have on our farms, and we've been pushing hard, and farmers have responded with trying to keep the water out of the slurry tanks, lagoons, whatever, so that at least you're not drawing water whenever you're spreading.
Yeah.
We also did do quite an in-depth study about 8 or 10 years ago, looking at a certain catchment that was in the rules have been made into an NVZ, and we actually analysed a lot of just about every farm in the catchment, and drew up maps and looked at the pH, P and K, and lo and behold, as you just talked about, the fields closest, I talk about the ring of confidence, the fields closest to the steading. I suppose even the days of, I'm not saying wheelbarrow, but certainly the small tanker, you only went so far. And that was expanded with the umbilical cord. We're now out to about 700-800 metres. So that's probably the next 2 or 3 fields round about. But we still have these fields. So those fields were, if anything, high or very high in phosphate and or potash. And then you had the fields furthest away that were generally showing low status. So I think it's important to make sure that the nutrients are there, but how do we make best use of them? And then combine that with, you pointed out in your talk, the fertilizers to make up the difference between what the soil's providing and what is coming from slurry or farmyard.
No, that's right. Exactly it.
I don't know if there's any other questions. We're coming to, I think we've answered most of those. I think we've got them all answered. If anybody's got any burning questions, fire it in now. We seem to have done well. We haven't lost anybody that was intending, so you've managed to hold their interest. Okay, question did come in there. Is protected urea kinder to the soil than ammonium nitrate?
I wouldn't look at. I wouldn't come down either side of that. It is a good question. Look at there's for and against, I suppose, in terms of both. In terms of a urea type product, a urea type product is a natural product in terms of urine. Feces coming out the back end, so the soil is conditioned. The soil is full of urea enzyme, urease enzyme, which is a natural enzyme to break down urea. So the soil is set up to handle a urea type product. That's natural in the system. In terms of an ammonium nitrate, it's a product that urea will eventually break down into. I suppose in terms of being kind to the soil, a nitrate product in its own right is probably not as kind in terms of water, in terms of other aspects, because it potentially can be lost easier. So I suppose there's no straight answer to that. I would say that protected urea is no different from what we can see in terms of biodiversity and everything else than a straight urea product. We don't actually see much different where the rates are being used in an optimum kind of way, appropriate rates for the amount of grass that's being grown, etc. There's no excesses in there. We don't see any negatives in terms of ammonium nitrate for that matter either. So I think it's kind of keeping it between the ditches, as we'd say here, making sure that the amount that's spread is matched up with the amount of yield at the different times of the year, the grass growth at the different times of the year. And if we keep it between the ditches, we don't go mad, I think the whole system can be sustainable and use fertilizers to good effect. I suppose I don't know whether I'm answering the question straight up, but
yes.
I suppose it's there is no straight answer, I suppose.
Right. Okay, I think we've answered most of the questions, or all the questions. I think before we do that, I'll obviously want to thank David on your behalf. I have found it interesting, even your concept there at the end, talking about the need for carbon, was something I've not really thought through. So as I say, I found it a very useful and very comprehensive and colourful presentation. Thank you for that. I think it's important for us all. The good thing about this on the FAS is the talks are recorded, and you can fast forward whenever I'm speaking, and then get to the meaty bit whenever David's speaking, if you want to go back and clarify any points. We've covered a lot. He mentioned at the beginning, and some of these we know it's what our grandfather and probably parents taught us as well. You touched on things like, you know, the importance of white clover and the importance of trying to get up to 20% clover. I think it's only in the last 4 or 5 years in Scotland we've seen the real desire to lift levels of clover in the seed rates, certainly compared to Ireland and both north and south. And you mentioned 20% clover, 150 kilograms of basic free nitrogen. That's 120 units of nitrogen if you can get that clover up. So that was something positive. You introduced the MACC diagram, which I think is great because it gives, hopefully government will maybe even be looking at that. We saw the potential, and you've come up with some very big figures. And I think the interesting thing, it was a low overall cost. It was 0.52 megatons that you're looking to reduce in terms of emissions. You mentioned how important it was to check which is the enzyme inhibitor, and a wee warning, it shouldn't be included with phosphate because of the spike effect and acidic effect. And you mentioned that the nitrogen use in Ireland has gone up, and there's a need then for sulphur has increased. I think we're finding that here. We have a fair amount of maritime, Leinster and Wigtonshire conditions, and where we used to have the coal fires coming across from Belfast, they're long gone. So I think it's something that we're now conscious of as well, that the need for sulphur, but looking to integrate that into a proper nutrient plan. I think the key point, and you hammered home a couple of times, was the benefit of protected urea. It does 2 jobs. Yes, we get a similar yield, but it's reducing ammonia loss and also reducing nitrous oxide. And so we're getting the 2 benefits in the one product. So with that, I think I want to thank you. We can't clap, we can't show our appreciation.
No need.
Appreciate it. And if I look forward a wee bit, I mentioned the consultation that's out by UK government on the use of urea. I've not delved into it. We should, as farmers, be aware, and businessmen, that there are other consultations up, one on the cleaner air for Scotland, and you can actually access that, just go onto the Scot.gov website and click on that, and you'll see that the consultation closes on 22nd of January. And there's also something called the Scottish Nitrogen Balance Sheet, and it closes on the 14th of January. So if there'll be no, we're not going to be able to go out maybe and celebrate Hogmanay. So if you're tired, stuck at home, maybe get the whiskey out and go through that consultation document. So that's just something to be aware and feed your interest. If we go to the next slide, at my point now, I just want to thank you all for joining us. We're living in difficult times and funny times, and we've certainly had to adapt, and I'm pleased to say Scottish Government's come in and given us a lot of support to allow us to adapt and make use of new technology. You'll gather that, looking at me, my grey hair or lack of hair, I reckon I was born 10 years too early to be able to be really good at this. What we do have is a lot of young guns, and one of them joined us tonight, and he kept me right, and that's Craig Bothwell. So I appreciate Craig taking the time. As I said, it's been useful. I think farmers are enjoying the format, but if you do enjoy it, you have to tell us. So there are feedback forms that should be sent back. You'll get an email shortly, and Craig has just reminded us that Damn Delicious, there's a prize draw, and there will be a draw for a £50 hamper, or voucher, sorry, that you can either use at Damn Delicious or Battlefield Bakery. Sound good? and it assures me that it's probably it's not the draw is only going to take 2 minutes. The survey will only take 2 minutes. It's fairly quick and painless. And if you go back to that last slide, just to make sure I haven't left anything out. Yes, I don't know how many of you have obviously navigated your way onto the FAS website. Can you spread the message? Because there's a lot of farmers that maybe aren't all that sure how you get onto it. And I keep saying to them, just Google FAS Scotland and even using an iPad and get onto it, because, and once you're on it, yes, most of you look at the events coming up, but more importantly, look at the events that have been, because most of these talks have been recorded, and there's certainly a lot of publication material as well. And if you'd like any more information on today's topic, you can contact your local SAC consulting office. And with that, I think, is that us finished, ready to live for the night? I haven't got nothing from Craig, so it must be.
Yep, happy Seamus, thank you.
And as I appreciate you all taking the time. I hope you get something out of it. And I hope you'll be able to spread the word. And it's something, as I say, the topic, I think you can see, it needed somebody to do its justice, and David has done that tonight. We needed to be clear. I thought it was clear about urea and et cetera, and then I took a wobble whenever I heard about the UK consultation. I thought, what's that all about? But the message, underlying message is, yeah, we should be looking to incorporate some, or certainly some more, protected urea into our fertiliser policy going forward, if we're to keep up you boys over the water in Ireland, your targets being met. So with that, it's now 9 o'clock, and thanks very much, and cheerio, you can sign off. Okay.
Thank you all.